Hello, and welcome to episode 12 of Scholarly Snippets. I'm your host, Steven Sorensen. Today, I'm joined by a guest who has an undergraduate bachelor's honors in ancient history and archaeology, and he also has a master's in medieval archaeology. He's been a professional archaeologist for just under 13 years as well. Aiden, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. Are you?
I'm also very good. Uh, so thanks for taking some time to join me today. This is my podcast slash talk show where I interview people that have degrees related to history, or they're getting their degrees related to history, or they have some sort of unrelated degree but like a real passion for history. So, as you can tell, it's a very history centered podcast, talk show type thing. You've been a professional archaeologist for just about 13 years. What originally got you interested in history?
This is one of the questions that I keep thinking about and then go, oh, it was that. And then realize, oh, it was that. And it's very hard to pin down the exact moment. But I think part of it was my dad is very interested in military history, mainly World War II, Napoleonic history, that general type of thing. And he always had a lot of books on it. So when I was starting to read and wanted to read things that weren't just from the school library, but I asked him, "Oh, can I read one of your books?" And I think the first one he gave me was a book called Angel Archangel. It's actually a book. I can't remember exactly what it was about, but it was about pilots, and it was based on certain true events. Obviously, wanting to know more, I started reading up about more of those events, and then it spiraled as well with having really good history teachers. So when they talked about things and said, "Oh, you could go and read this," I was like, "Oh, well, I've already been doing that with this subject. Oh, that's another history book," and I'd go and pick it up and I'd read more about it, and then just it built up and built up, and everything that I read gave me more questions that I wanted answering, and then obviously that then ended up with me going to university in the end, um, just to find out even more, really.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, really, it just sounds like you've always been surrounded by history. Your father was really into history, and really, as far back as you can remember, you've been exposed to it.
Very much so.
Great. So, you have a couple degrees here. What were some of the factors that contributed to your choice of school?
The um, Initially, with as I said, I had very good history teachers. When I was doing my A levels, my form tutor was also my history teacher, and she had a friend who worked for Oxford Archaeology. And for work experience, I don't know how it is in the US, but in the UK, there'll be a week or 2 weeks for some schools where you go out to a company and you experience what that work might be like to decide if that's really what you want to do. Sometimes people will just go to a company and go, "Oh, I really want to do this," and find out it's completely not for them.
Hmm.
And then they can sort of change gears. But a friend worked for Oxford Archaeology, and she organised me working with them for a week. Absolutely enjoyed it, and had brilliant weather as well, which really helped. Um, and I worked with a man named John Tierney, and pretty much all archaeologists, and in recent years it's become almost compulsory, have to have a degree to go into archaeology. And he was one of the people that had entered without a degree, and was doing his degree while we were there. So I asked him for a recommendation, and he said, Reading. Reading's not, it's where I live. It's actually not far from where I was living at that point, which was in Oxfordshire. It's a 40-minute drive at most. And so I thought, well, that's easy enough. Looked it all up, rated all of the universities, and we get to apply for 6 all at once. So I went for a range up from St Andrews, which was straight through masters, because the Scottish university system is ever so slightly different. It's actually a 4-year degree, where it's masters, whereas UK ones are just a 3-year bachelor's to start off with. And I got accepted into all but one, depending on my grades. And I just thought, well, I'll choose Reading. Then I got to Reading and discovered that this man, John Tierney, was actually the manager of the field school by that point. And talked to him more. And far down the road, he now works with me at the company that I work for, and I've been in charge of him, which is very, very, very bizarre, as he's known me for so long. But yeah, it was asking archaeologists what they recommended, where to go, where not to go. The criteria that I was using were you can go quite specialist. There was one I was looking at in Belfast Queen's University, and they do a lot on medieval manuscripts. And at that point, I knew that I quite liked medieval, but I didn't know if I wanted to specifically do it at that point. Obviously, later on, when I did my master's, I decided that was the way to go. But I thought that would be a bit too specialist. So to keep it broad, I went for ancient history and archaeology, which gives me all of the ancient history. It then gives me the broad scope of archaeology, and then I could focus down later on with a master's. Which then brings me on to why I chose the master's I did. Often they'll recommend go to a different university for your master's, and then go back to that university for your first university for a PhD if you want it. But I didn't have the money to do it full time, and obviously I was already established living in Reading, so I started work as soon as I finished my undergraduate at the company where I've worked ever since. I've worked at the same company for 13 years, and decided to do, well, if I'm going to do a master's, I have to do it at Reading, because I'm a bit stuck with there. But looking at where else I could have gone, it turned out it was one of the best choices. We had some of the best medieval archaeology professors that you could hope for in the UK anyway. So I struck gold, basically, and carried on doing my master's at the university.
Yeah, now you've been a professional archaeologist for well over a decade, so definitely it sounds like you honed in on exactly what you wanted. You found the right colleges to go to, and you found employment shortly after.
Yeah, it's one of the things in archaeology that now with the degrees, when I was at university, there wasn't many year in industry degrees, which was something.
That type of degree? You cut out just for a second.
So it was a year in industry. So what you do is you do your first 2 years, you then go away and you get yourself a job in the industry related to your degree. Then you come back and then you do your third year, which is your dissertation, obviously everything finishing up. If I'd have had that choice back then, I might not have gone to Reading if they didn't have that program, but they had a very good field school. So we sort of had a halfway house. So you often find that a lot of people the companies will be very linked to certain universities where they'll pick up these students sort of halfway through their degree to do the year in industry, and then the student will just turn around and go, oh, I'll go and work there then. So you end up with these little sort of microcosms of archaeology. Like where I work, it's about 75% of the staff went to Reading or are still studying at Reading in various different degrees. And even our osteologist who was studying at Reading is now a lecturer there as well. So you end up with this quite close attachment to the universities and a lot of the industry. It's not non-intentional, but it just happens as it goes along.
Yeah, that's cool. So you got your BA honors in ancient history and archaeology. Did you originally go into school for that?
Yes.
So you never changed your major?
No, essentially the way the UK system works, we start specialising a little bit earlier. So, and that all starts when you're about 14, and you pick your GCSEs, and then you drop the occasional subject, which is only really one or possibly two. So I ended up dropping RE and geography, which is odd because I really like maps, but I had to choose, and history won out over those two because it was choosing which humanity to do. You then pick a language out of the languages done, so you're not doing both the languages that you could do, you just do one. So you start focusing down them. And generally then when you go on to do your A levels, you will do, you'll start by doing 4. Well, they've changed the system slightly now, but when I did it, you had A levels were an AS level and then an A2 level. So you had the full A level was the 2 years, or you do 1 year for the AS level, and then you'd pick your best 3 subjects and do them full. So you'd end up with 3 A levels and 1 AS level, or you could do 4. But you are already starting to really, really specialize at that level of A levels, and that's 16 to 18 age range. So by the time you're getting to university, you've already got a pretty good idea about exactly what you want to do. But there's still scope, obviously, for changing your degree when you start it. You have to have fulfilled the requirements to get in, obviously, and generally across most subjects, that's pretty standard level. The university will have its general grade level. So if you've got in, then it doesn't make much difference. But then you'd pick specific units. I did contemplate at one point switching ancient history to history, but I hadn't done the core units, and that would have added another year onto my degree. My girlfriend at the time, she started with history and ancient history, but she took the 2 core units for archaeology. So she was then able for a second year to switch to ancient history and archaeology. So often what you'll find is the ancient history and archaeology is quite broad, and you've got quite a latitude of subjects to pick. So you can do ones from here, there, and everywhere. For example, I did forensics because it's directly related to archaeology, but it was actually a geology module because of how it was taught. So you can do stuff that's slightly outside. So I also took history modules because they were related, but not directly part of my degree. But often people will hedge their bets in their first year, and they'll take core modules for multiple things to switch it around. But at the university I was at, we found the archaeology department was the best of the sort of history, ancient history, and archaeology. The archaeology department was the best one. So it was often people would switch to that department. So when I'd looked at possibly switching one of them out, it would have been ancient history out to history, or even just going full single honours rather than joint honours into archaeology itself. But I quite liked a lot of the ancient history courses, and they were helping with my archaeology in the long run. So I thought, might as well keep it broad. I can always specialise when I get onto my masters.
Great. So you kind of already had a clear picture of what you were going to be doing, and that's pretty much why you didn't need to change your major. So you have quite a history here. What have been your favorite parts of it? Your favorite parts of exploring these different areas of study?
There's one of my favorite things was actually discovering, or I had a clear idea of sort of the areas that I liked, discovering that bit that I really, really liked. So at each level, obviously, you're narrowing down specifically what you like to eventually, obviously, when people do PhDs, that's how you end up with these really long, very specific titles, because you've narrowed down so far by that point. And it's that narrowing down bit that I absolutely loved. So initially, I just generally liked stuff from sort of the end of the Roman Empire up through to, you're talking sort of the general medieval period, how people stereotypically imagine medieval period, not so much the later parts of the medieval period, where you're starting to get moving on to more sort of like into the Tudors sort of end of it. I tend to like the earlier bits, especially sort of those migration periods. But it was the finding out that it was those migrations of peoples that I was really interested in, the collapse of the Roman Empire. And through studying that and the material culture of it, it turned out that I was looking at a lot of weapons and armor. And then obviously specializing down into it, and I'm a metalwork specialist as well, right? metalwork reports from our sites, and realizing that you have gone into such depth that you can do something like pick up a nail and date it, and it just looks like a common square nail to anyone else. But it's those realization moments you get. And you're like, yeah, I'm really good at this. I ended up writing nearly 12,000 words about a group of Roman nails.
It's almost paradoxical the way that you narrow it down so much, but at the same time you've expanded it so much as well, your knowledge on the subject. So well, sorry to interrupt, but I'm interested. How do you go about dating a nail?
Well,
is it through
one
the
of the big things about metal artifacts is generally in commercial archaeology, we're quite limited on the scientific testing sides of things. So you can do the scientific testing of the actual metals themselves, but the majority of the time we do something called associated dating. So when you're digging up a site in archaeology, you get the stratigraphy. In general, if it's below something, it's older. There are numerous exceptions to the rule, but you then know if you've got, say, 3 layers and you find something in the bottom layer that's identified as Bronze Age pottery, and then you find something in the top layer that's medieval pottery, that middle layer has to be somewhere between. So you get all of that pottery information coming in that you can use. But when you've been doing a lot, there are certain bits that stand out, and it's easier to do when you've got a large collection of them, hence the 12,000 words. That was a Roman villa, and those were just the ones that we kept, not the ones that we weighed and discarded, because there were so many of them. Romans actually had loads of different types of nails, which is something that we don't really have anymore. If you think about it, most nails, we've got different lengths of nails, and then you have nails with some different bits in them for modern things, but that's mainly because is it for use with a hammer or a nail gun? Is it because you want to keep it in the wood or not in the wood? So we have some of those types now, but the actual standard Roman nail has stayed almost exactly the same since the Iron Age up to when we started using round nails with our machine manufacture. So you have to look at the heads. When you look at the heads, that's when you start to be able to tell things. How the metal has delaminated and degraded will often tell you about its quality and its construction as well. But the shapes of the heads are really, really distinctive. So you can then put them in brackets. And when you've got lots of them, you can then look at what lengths that they were as well. You can look at things around them. If they're bent in certain ways, then that gives you certain clues to it. So you know, depending on what type of site that you've got the metalwork from, you can tell whether that's an important piece of metalwork. Say if you're out in the middle of a field and all you found are ditches, and you find some nails out there, you know there's a structure somewhere nearby, but they could have been used to just hold any 2 bits of wood together. But if you know that you've got a building on site, then you can tell the status of the building by the types of nails that they used as well, which then, if you know the status of a building, that then can connect in with the pottery and all of the other artifacts. And that's where you get your associated dating from, that gives you your rough time period. And then you can really narrow it down with the certain shapes and sizes. And it was utterly amazing how consistent the Romans were across the entire empire with something as simple as a nail.
Interesting. And if I heard you right, did you say that they basically look the same throughout? They don't change much throughout how many hundreds of years would you say?
You're talking from when they start using nails consistently in the later Iron Age.
What kind of year, what year mark would you put that at? Just a general circa date.
You sort of talking a few hundred years BC, really. So I'd say for consistent use, you're talking probably 200 BC onwards.
All right.
just as a general across all areas. And then right up until when I was a child, we were redoing a room in a house and we pulled a nail. And that nail, if I found that on a Roman site with some Roman pottery, it was a Roman nail. It's exactly the same styles, because they perfected the function.
So like it was just so effective that even in, like, how old was this house that you were remodeling or pulling nails out of?
It's just the style of the nail is just so effective that could have been a Roman. It could have been a Roman nail in the sense of,
like,
a Roman would have made exactly the same thing to do the same job. Right. It's that if it's not broken, don't fix it attitude that we have all the way through. And it isn't until we start extruding, in manufacturing and using a certain type of wire to make nails. Until you change the manufacturing process, the way the Romans did it was just the most efficient way. That's what they always did. They just found the most efficient way to do it.
So really,
and we saw no need to change it.
Maybe even over 1,000 years, they were doing it in that sort of fashion, like well into the Middle Ages, you would say, with that type of nail.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few different factors then that would go into dating it, because if they all look kind of similar, you have to take into consideration the location that you found it in and stuff like that. Does that sound right?
Yeah. It's a lot to do with, like pottery. People say, "Oh, this pottery is of that date." But obviously, you go, "Well, how do you know that pottery is of that date?" Mm-hmm. We know the pottery is of that date because it was found with a coin of that date at some point, or with someone. It was a cooking pot, and someone had burnt a meal on the inside, and so we can carbon date that. And then you're looking at the fabric type and the styles, and everything that goes along with it, and you build up that body of information so that you can be pretty confident that when you get everything together, that's probably what that is.
Interesting.
And so you're looking. It's often, if you're dating, just say you've got a handful of nails. It's not the nail itself you're dating. You're looking at absolutely everything around it, and then that will give you the date of the nail as well. So that, as you were saying, it's that specialized so much you end up having this really broad knowledge to bring it all back in.
So yeah, we just got off on kind of a tangent. I'm interested in dating methods, so that was fascinating for me to hear about. Just if you were to real quick summarize, what was your favorite part of all that? Like specializing, really? To summarize
specializing. My favorite part is the specializing and knowing that you have that specific bit of knowledge. That bit of pride. The best example would be if you're watching a program and you see someone walk along and pick it up and go, "Oh, well, this is a this, and it was exactly this date and that," and then just put it down again and carry on walking, because
they're like a walking encyclopedia.
Yeah. Being able to do that when my memory has not always been the best thing, but realizing that I've managed to actually do that as well. So it's personal as well as just in general in archaeology. That specialism there is really just favorite thing. Seeing other people do it as well is amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So now on the other side of the coin, what have been some of the greatest challenges that you faced in your pursuits here?
With commercial archaeology, there's been a lot of general problems with finance, really, across all heritage, and it's pretty common for arts and heritage consistently underfunded, and it makes it a struggle to keep your love for a job. Say you get sent out to a site, they're going to build a housing estate, and better one here. They're going to quarry an area for gravel out in the middle of nowhere, because you don't put your quarries in the middle of the city. So you're miles from anywhere. There isn't much shelter because it used to be a big field, or they've stripped it all back and there is literally no vegetation or soil. You're just down to gravels, and there is nothing but one single ditch with no dating evidence, and it's raining. And that's day in, day out for a month. That's all that you're doing in the rain. Gets pretty demoralizing at that point. And then you add in the money factor of, I've got a good education, I could go and do something that paid me more and I could be in a nice office. So it's having that stubbornness to fight through that as well, knowing that you are going to get those good points of you're going to find something and go, oh, I've suddenly found this particular thing where you weren't expecting it. I found a pot of Roman coins literally 5 centimeters under the ground level in a primary school next to a path, literally 5 centimeters, and it was a pot of Roman coins that those coins had been there since what date we gave them now, 3 to 400 AD, roughly, somewhere in that time period.
Ancient.
So they've been sat there for 1700 years just under the surface of the grass, which I was expecting to find a couple of cables, and you just find something like that, and then it just rejuvenates you. So that it's that challenge of knowing that you're going to find that at some point and trying to get through that. Then there's the physical side of it, obviously, that comes along with it. It's archaeology's murder on the body. It utterly destroys the body. Anyone roughly at my level in archaeology will have tendon damage of some variety at some point. Usually the wrists, elbows, and knees are the first 3 things to go. I've even had issues with my neck as well.
Why is that?
Manual labor. It's all done by hand. The tools we're using are just modern versions of the tools they used for farming in 2000 BC.
And in a sense, you're sort of farming for artifacts.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just that the constant repetitive physical labor. Construction is, well, weird enough, we're part of the construction industry, if you think about it, because of the way commercial archaeology works. We see a lot of builders in the same way. And you'll see the guy's been laying bricks all his life, and his hands are just all curled up into claws and everything, because it's just murder on the body. But generally, once people get to that level, they start branching off into other things. So I supervise. As I said, I write reports on artifacts. I can go out to supervise sites. So doing things like watching briefs, where you're not physically digging, you're watching just in case they find something, because there's the possibility you might find something, but you're pretty sure there's nothing. But you want to be there just in case. So you end up doing more of those things. So it's that trick of trying to get those jobs before your body's utterly destroyed. But yeah, it's knowing that it's a lot of hard work, but you've got to find those rewards in it, and those have really been their challenging bits. And often you'll find you get a new raft of undergraduates in, and I always joke about seeing how many make it through winter. Because it's true. And I was very surprised in the last lot that we got in, not a single one left after winter, and we had one of the worst winters for archaeology as well. And I was generally amazed with it. But it used to be I think you'd find at least a quarter of them wouldn't even make it through winter or out the other side, because they would go, this is too much hard work outside in the cold and wet, and I can't do this, the really good bit of archaeology. I wanted to do that. All of the boring stuff that you have to do in your job, which is literally just moving tons of soil around until you find the stuff to be able to write the report. It's got to be done. But doing that in really bad conditions under pay's getting a little bit better now, but under what became quite bad pay conditions as well, it really, really has made everyone struggle and led to quite a mass exodus from the industry at a couple of points. But then you get to find cool stuff. So
what was that?
You get to find cool stuff. So
yeah, right. So yeah, just to summarize that, the 2 main things that you were saying is finances, getting to pay for stuff and finding employment, and then the other big thing is the physical toll from having to really be working in a physical environment, through sort of like a mailman, rain, sleet, snow, and wind, and all the above. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. The physical part I hadn't really considered much. I don't really think of archaeology as a physically demanding job, but then after you've shared this bit with me, I've changed my mind on that, and now I kind of see where you're coming from on that. So
It's often quite a surprising thing to a lot of people, because when we get down to the really nice stuff that we get for those the pretty photographs and the bits that are good for TV and things, we are using the trowel and the brush and that really fine tools and all those cool bits. But you don't see everything that goes up to that point where someone's doing that. So it's not that doesn't happen. It's just that that's the end result of 3 weeks of just barrows of mud going and going and going.
I don't know who said it. It might have been Michelangelo, or it's one of the great artists. He says, if people knew how much work I had to put in to do what I do, they wouldn't even appreciate the product. Because there's just so much hard work that goes into it. So I wanted to ask you about pseudo history. You've been in this field for over a decade, and one thing that I'm really interested in is this fake history and, well, what do we make of it? Like, why do people do it and stuff like that? And I've got my own series aside from this one that kind of goes into that, but I'm interested in your experience. Have you ever come across forgeries or hoaxes of the sort in the archaeological fields, or?
Yes, no. One of one of my favorite ones is actually I found a fake Roman coin, but it wasn't a fake Roman coin that anyone modern had made. It was a local Iron Age tribesman who was trying to nick stuff off the Romans, and he'd made a bunch of fake coins, and we'd found them as well. So you find these fakes all throughout history. The people will do forgeries, and then obviously we worked out that these were fakes because we know how they were supposed to be minted. We've got all the knowledge of that. But if we didn't have that in context with all of the site it was on, there was a Roman road down into Winchester, well-known Roman town. Chester gives it away, really. So because we found it in that area, obviously, we knew that and we were able to narrow that down. And I think a lot of the pseudo history comes from is a lot of enthusiasm without the breadth of knowledge that people have. And I think very little of it, to me, is malicious. And that tends to be more when you're getting into sort of political stuff where people are looking at using history for their political ideas. So comes a lot out of the ideas of fascism, looking back towards the past. Obviously, the fascias itself was harking back to the Roman Empire because that's what a lictor would carry in front of someone who was having a triumph. So it was a symbol. It was a symbol of power. So that history and harking back to it was a big part of fascism in general. What we ended up then with was, and the Russians as well had their history. They were very important history, but they had a different outlook on it as well. So you had this two competing why people were looking at things. We ended up getting a lot of good archaeology out of it because people were going and looking for those things. The problem is when people don't have that broader context of why. So like the fascias, knowing why the fascias was chosen in the first place, what the original fascists were actually doing with their symbolism to harken back to them, why it was important to the Romans. You end up then just looking at the surface level of going, oh, well, the fascists say it's a this. It's like, well, no, actually, it's not. It's a this. Dictators, another common term we use. It's a bad thing nowadays. It was never a bad thing. It was just a position back in the day. It was a position in an emergency, and all of those things all come together. And what I find is that when I come across it, it's generally well-meaning. It's someone's just got something wrong, or they got really excited and they've gone and read a bunch of things, and someone else well-meaning has written a bunch of things without truly knowing about it. You get this melting pot of ideas, and you come up with this craziness that comes out of it. Then all you need to drop into that is someone who's stubborn and never likes to be wrong, and then that's when you end up getting the problems that come along with it. There was one incident I remember we were doing a site in Oxford underneath St John's College, I believe. Initially, it was we thought it was a late medieval, early post medieval inn. So we were expecting standard foundations, bricks, rubbish pits full of clay pipe, all your standard stuff, oyster shells, because oyster shells and champagne was for the poor people when you go back that far. That's completely flipped now, obviously. But we got to the other side of it, and they were digging down. I was actually on another completely different site for a lot of this, a site that I found actually more interesting at one point. And they were digging down, and they started to find skeletons. And then they uncovered another one, and then another one, and then another one. And there were at least 50, if not more. And they were Scandinavians who'd been massacred by the Saxons in the St. Brice's Day massacre. Underneath that, we found, and the Saxons used to do this a lot actually, used to go back to pagan monuments and bury people there. So they'd found this low depression in the ground, and they'd gone and they'd dumped all these murdered bodies in there. Absolutely, looking at it as an archaeological resource, absolutely fascinating. But all the bodies were entangled, and then we found a henge ditch underneath it. They're quite rare, and this henge ditch was, I was trying to convert the meters into feet for you. It was a good, it was a good 3 meters deep at certain points, and 5 meters wide. It was it's narrow points.
It's like 9 feet deep, 15 feet wide. It's a pretty good size.
Absolutely huge thing. Completely unexpected. Now, when you find human remains, the first thing you do is you put up hoarding around your site to make sure that people can't peer in. It's all to do with respect for the dead. They were people. We don't know initially how they were buried. You have to get a license from the Home Office to exhume them. It's almost impossible to get refused for that, because to be applying for one in the first place, obviously we've got degrees all over the place and professionals dealing with it. So you get your license for that. And then there are multiple sets of guidelines. As I said, we had the osteologist on site who was dealing with it. And there's lots and lots of different things you have to do. Because there's so many things, it takes a while as well. So all this hoarding went up. There's a conspiracy theorist in Oxford who decided they were putting the hoarding up because they'd found a secret Illuminati lodge underneath the college. And they didn't want us.
The site right here that you've been looking at?
Yeah, and that was the site. The hoarding went up because we found skeletons. He was saying it went up because we found a secret Illuminati lodge and we didn't want to let anyone know. That video disappeared off YouTube quite quickly, but he's well known for doing those videos. So you do get some crazy conspiracy theory myths that come into it. Where that then becomes a problem is people not understanding what archaeologists do, and that's when you find on some sites your locals with the pitchforks coming out, and that isn't far from the truth on certain sites. We've had diggers completely destroyed and satellite archaeologists chased back into their cars with garden tools at certain points because they think we're builders, because they don't even understand how to put a foundation in. And the way that we dig holes, you wouldn't want to put a foundation in one of those holes. You're building a fall over. But it's that education and knowledge that people don't have. And that's what I was talking about originally. So you end up getting these big problems all through this lack of just sitting down and going, oh, let's ask the archaeologist what they're doing. So we try and do a lot of open days and things like that to combat these problems. And you still do get your occasional nutter who's convinced that about ancient aliens. It's like, well, no, that's it's an interesting topic for discussion, and obviously we'll never truly know. Mm-hmm. But often the evidence that's trotted out is like, no, that's not that's not evidence.
I don't want to linger on this too long, but did he have any reason for saying it was the Illuminati secret base or something, or? It was like just because there were bones there, and the Illuminati has bones in their stuff too.
I quite like my conspiracy theories, so I did do a bit of looking into it. It's all connected to Oxford University, and obviously the major university. You've got St Andrews in Scotland, and you've got Oxford, Cambridge, which was actually an offshoot of Oxford University, as well. So Oxford and St Andrews, obviously the older ones, and that's where you get it's the prestige of going to there. It's like your Harvards and your Yales. It's that type of, if you've been there, you just have to say the name. No one cares what degree you did. No one cares what level you got. The fact that you came out there and you have a degree from one of them is enough. So you end up getting the royals and the rich kids getting in there, and you're like, how did they get in there? They're really thick. Oh, look, that's a new wing they've just put on that college, which obviously breeds conspiracy theories about secret clubs, the Skull and Bones clubs and things like that. Oxford was also the royalist capital in our civil war, one of the 7 civil wars that we had in the 1600s. So you had the royals, the royal court in Oxford as well. The colleges obviously are a lot of them have their roots in being that old, and they have mysterious traditions and things like that. And that goes along with a lot of those rich people that come out of there are often Freemasons. And as all good conspiracy theorists know, Freemasons, Illuminati, well, they're the same thing, aren't they? Well, no, not really. But so you have this weird collection between the two, because they do have some utterly bizarre traditions in Oxford. Or even St Andrews, there's outside of the main hall in St Andrews, there's a stone that marks where someone was burnt, they were martyred. And the superstition is, if you step on that stone as you walk past, you will fail your degree. No one ever walks on it. Even people that aren't superstitious, you just avoid it. Everyone avoids it. That's that whole human group psychology thing. So you ended up with all of these crazy things that people do. And that led to a lot of, obviously, these conspiracy theories about, they're just trying to cover up what they've found. Yeah, we're trying to cover
it's
it up.
Oxford,
It's dead
so
bodies.
obviously the Illuminati is involved.
Yeah.
They're inseparable.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. So yeah, thanks for indulging me on that. I do like to talk about fake history and stuff, but really this podcast is about true history and trying to identify what's actually happened. And so I enjoyed getting your perspective on this dig site, and then also hearing your commentary on what some other people have thought, even if it's not too reliable on the information. To continue on with some of the questions I had for you, have you ever considered, you've been in this for so long, have you ever considered getting another degree?
I did initially. As I said, I did my master's part-time so I could finance it, because you couldn't get a loan to do a master's back then. Then PhDs became a lot harder to get, and I needed to earn a living, so needed to go full-time to pay back some of the debt that I built up. And said, in 5 years, I'll be back doing a PhD in 5 years. I'll get my PhD before I'm 30. I'll definitely do a PhD. And then the goalpost moved, and here I am in my mid-30s without that PhD. I'm not 100% sure that I would. I've looked several times about going back to university, but I've not actually looked at carrying on to the subject I was doing for my master's into a PhD. What I was actually ended up looking at was doing a master's in law, and then doing a doctorate in law as well. Law is very, very connected to history. I don't know if you've noticed with the history podcasters that we have around, there's a few that have backgrounds either in law, or they are lawyers, or they do a job that's connected to it. there's a lot of similar aspects of it. The research aspect of it, the attention to detail, the interpretation of something using several bits of information. It's got loads of connections with it. But if I did the PhD in law, I would still focus it on archaeology. I haven't really gone and done it because money is the main thing. And I worked it out once how much I'd need. That I struggled in my master's to get it accepted what I was doing, because they have some weird ideas about if you ever mention anything about weaponry and armor, then clearly you're just fanboying over something and it's nothing particularly serious. Why would anyone do that? It needs to be something that will help society. I turned around and said to them, Metropolitan Police gave me the testing equipment because they're doing the same tests to protect policemen. Pretty important for society, don't you think? And I suppose so. Got in there, and there were 3 people doing master's degrees on snails in a small river in Oxfordshire, because that's going to help humanity. So you end up with these weird breaks in the thought in academia.
Well, do you know what was up with
really
the snails?
Helpful.
Maybe they cure cancer, possibly, the snails.
Well,
Their
hopefully they
shells
will.
possibly are a delicious treat if they're ground down properly and mixed with turmeric.
It could be. I mean, you could probably get a PhD out of attempting this. And
yeah, sorry to interject.
yeah, but it's that part of academia that always put me off a little bit. And then having met several people with PhDs, it's a complete mixed bag as to whether they've come out with a PhD and go, look at me, I've got a PhD, I'm better than you. Like, yeah, but you've got no experience doing your job, and really do not handle pottery like that. No, don't do it, put it down. Just because you've got that academic education doesn't mean you can do the practical sides, and it's a big problem in archaeology. What I mentioned earlier about the year in industry degrees, the people that have come out of those ones are way better, because they understand that there's a link between the 2 subjects. Of knowing the practical side and then knowing the academic side. I'm not sure if I'd want to go back in and formally do the academic side. I do my own research just because. So I find something interesting on site, or a particularly interesting site, I will read up on it, just because I want to, and find connections. I'm quite big into family history, and when we're digging in a place, I'll try and find out if one of my ancestors may have been nearby, where they were connected, because then that's a cool personal connection to it. And I built up enough notes on that I could probably do that as a PhD. Getting it funded, though, there's no hope in hell of getting that funded. And that, to me, is the biggest problem, is lack of funding. There was already a struggle for funding as it was. Then it got cut. And then I don't run in academic circles. So I then have to re-gear life as a student, and writing is much different to your life as an archaeologist, even though we do a lot of the writing. Writing reports is a different thing than doing your research and writing your essays. And you never truly lose those skills, especially if you're doing archaeology as a job, because some of them do cross over. But putting myself through academia and all of that, for the end result being I've got a piece of paper to say I know what I'm doing, whereas I've got a lot of experience and I've already got master's level qualifications, which are becoming rarer in archaeology for that to be a higher level. Pretty much everyone's got a master's degree in archaeology these days. It's a weird thing that happened in the recession, that people didn't want to leave university because there were no jobs in archaeology. So they stayed and did their master's degrees because they brought out loans to do them. And so people were taking their undergraduate degrees that are slightly broader and then using the master's degree to focus down. Like I took medieval archaeology. There was another guy who did maritime archaeology. There was someone else who did geoarchaeology, osteoarchaeology. So people tend to do their narrowing bit at that stage more often than not. That made me kind of want to do a PhD. But at the end of the day, if someone would turn around and give me the funding for something that I've written, or have researched to the level of PhD, yeah, but I've got no real want to dive back into academia, just have a piece of paper to say that I can do something that I can already do and know how to do and is not going to earn me any extra money.
So yeah, just from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you would pursue another degree, but you kind of already have the information that you would get from it. And because it is pricey to get another degree, why would you spend all that money to already know what you have and just for the piece of paper, I guess, for authority? So that's kind of what's
Yeah.
contributed to not wanting to go back. And also, it kind of
Yeah.
sounded like you had some issues with the current state of academia and how they conduct themselves.
It's changing. Archaeology has always been a weird one because the universities, especially now, when I was there, it was rare to find a lecturer who'd worked in commercial archaeology. I had no idea how commercial archaeology worked. And I knew that because everything they taught us about commercial archaeology, when I got a job in commercial archaeology, I found out was completely wrong or was massively out of date. They did pick up on it really, really well. And there's a big movement to connect companies. And this is what I was saying about these tight connections between the universities and the companies now. There's a movement to have lecturers that have experience. And I've started to see it a few times on job adverts for lecturer positions, where they're requiring someone to have at least 2 to 5 years experience out in the field, digging, working in a commercial setting, so that they have that practical experience. So you don't have that person who's an archaeologist when all they've read are the books. It's like that's more, well, you're more of a historian at that point, really, because you're not really part of archaeology is going and touching the physical objects and doing the research on the physical side of things. The historian side, completely valuable. We wouldn't be able to do what we did if they didn't do what they did, and vice versa. So they're intrinsically linked. But if all you're doing in your archaeology is gathering up other people's work and then working from that without the practical application of it, you end up with problems. And they're starting to rectify it, but there is still a little bit too much of talking about things that aren't really, unless you're in academia, you wouldn't really care. The PhD titles, obviously, if I found my master's dissertation and read you the title, that I can't remember it exactly.
Can you give us a guess? Out. What could you just like kind of along the lines of what it is?
It started out as well. I started out right. I wanted to see how good the medieval armor was. So if you hit it with a sword, and the sword, if someone was wearing armor, would it cause damage to the bone in a certain way than if they weren't wearing armor? Therefore, we could compare it. And if you were looking at a grave, because you don't bury people with armor very often, that's quite a rare thing to do. So you could look at someone and go, well, they were a warrior, and we can tell they were in battle because this injury that they had, they healed from. Or this is definitely the cemetery from that battle. It's basically to improve that side of it. Turns out, no one's even remotely gone and looked at this apart from a few people who took longbows out and shot them into car doors. Like, right, so this is a bit harder. So it became more and more and more vague as it went along. And it was a framework for the potential implementation of studying the effects of weaponry on armor and results we can see in the archaeological record, or something equally as big. Like, subject matter in it could have been absolutely brilliant, but absolutely no one had done work on it, which is my fault for not looking into it a little bit more beforehand. I got a good dissertation out of it. Well, didn't write it particularly well because I was strapped for time, but the information, I got a lot of marks for the information in there, so it was good from that perspective. And it's those specialist things, like the snails thing as well. It's like, yeah, cool. That's awesome. We'll learn a lot about ecology through the time periods in those areas. But does anyone really care
Well,
when you're getting that
possibly those
specific?
were some really special snails, you know?
They,
I don't know
they
if you've
must have
looked
been.
into their studies or not, but possibly these snails, they could be just the next big thing.
Yeah. Well, they were in Oxfordshire, so they could be Illuminati snails.
They could very well be. And who's to say there were even snails at all? So,
Exactly.
um, we got to start wrapping up a little bit here, but do you have any plans or events coming up that you can share with us, sort of related to history or maybe your job?
Um, well, I've been on furlough now for a couple of months, but I've been keeping up with it. A project I was working on before I was on furlough. Um, One of the big things in commercial archaeology is this is what I said about what's the point in it. There's no point in us doing the work if no one reads it. The reason that people don't read it is because people don't know it's there. So there's been a big drive in archaeology in general to get things out there. I write fiction, so know how to use Amazon to put out ebooks. So I just turned around to my boss and said, I can make ebooks. This is really simple. We've got a back catalogue of 130 works here. I could literally just convert them all to ebooks and put them out there to disseminate this information. And we started to revamp our website with it as well, so we could get so we could sell more copies. He sells them at cost because it's all about getting that information out there.
Do you have a link to that? Do you have a link to that I can put in the description for people who are interested?
Unfortunately, because of the lockdown, the project is on hold, and that side of the website has not gone live.
Unfortunately.
Because of that. But what the impetus for us doing that, other companies are doing that, and there is a lot of grey literature out there. Grey literature are reports that we've written for our sites that you can read if you want, because they're a matter of public record, really, because it's part of the planning. But they're not done. They're done as a report that a developer would need, so they can be interesting reading. It's proper in-depth research stuff. We put all of ours up onto the website. That I can tell you where to go for that. So it's www.tvas.co.uk. That's the homepage, obviously. Have a browse around the site. It'll tell you where to buy the physical copies, because we still do sell the physical copies. Obviously, shipping to somewhere like the US would be quite difficult, money-wise, but some people might want that. We do have all of our monographs, our publications, did originally start as those site reports, though. So often we'll have some not as detailed from an analysis perspective, but all of the detail will be there for all of the actual practical stuff, and there will be some analysis in there, but not the extended academic part of it you find in the publication. We've got all of those on the website. So browsing around the website, see all that. We've got resources on there. When we do open days, we'll put copies of the PDFs of our posters up there as well. So if there's anyone who does sort of teaching and wants to use those as resources, we put those up there for that as well. And there are, just searching for commercial archaeology companies in the UK, there are lots of other companies that do it as well. When I write reports at work, I'm occasionally on other companies' websites reading their reports as references for what I'm writing. So it's a big sort of back and forth and all of this information. And it's a big thing in archaeology to get all of that out there. Well, I know we're really up to date on keeping all of our reports that we have written up there, easily accessed and linked. I know because I did some of the coding just before I was furloughed. So I know that works. So you can go and look there. And then obviously, when this is all over, hopefully I'll get back to starting to put them on Amazon, but then that'll all be on our website that will reveal that when it comes about eventually.
Great. Yeah, you'll have to send me a link to that whenever that does happen, and I'll update the description to the video. So, on this series, I've so far given everybody a chance to leave a message for people that are interested in history, be it for sort of people that don't have an extensive background in it, they're just getting into it as a hobby, possibly maybe considering a career and education in it. But I want to give you a chance to give a message to people like that, because you have quite some experience here. What would you tell people that are sort of just getting interested?
To read widely, and you will hear people tell you, don't read pulp history. That's nonsense. Do read pulp history. The stuff that you can get off the shelf in a bookshop, it's written that way so you can access it without all of the technical jargon that we would use in an academic paper. And without that broader knowledge, you're never going to be able to get to that point later on. You'll end up with gaps. So go browse, find a book on the time period you like, read it, look in the back, check if there's references. If there's references in the back, you're golden. Follow those references. Start chasing the references and go read the books that this person who wrote the pulp history read, because there will always be stuff backed up in there. And that body of knowledge that you will eventually pick up. I've met historians, and often find this with podcasters as well. Now, I've worked in commercial archaeology for 13 years. Some of those podcasters have far more historical knowledge about the medieval period than I do, and it's my job to know that. So you can gather a lot of knowledge by just reading through the sources, chasing it around, finding the interesting stories, and just exploring it in general.
Great. So yeah, okay. Just read as much as you can, explore as much as you can, and you'll be on a good path. So Aiden, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
For everyone that's watching, if you want to see more of these, there is the entire playlist public on the Ctruth YouTube channel. And if you enjoy the Ctruth content, I have exclusive offers and benefits and content posted on the Ctruth Patreon channel, which you can join for as low as $1 a month. So the link to that will also be in the description to this video. And with that, that concludes episode 12. Aiden, thanks again for joining me. I had a pleasure speaking with you.
You too.